The neutrality and impartiality of the Red Cross during World War I. World War I was full of conflict. War was raging not only on the front, but also in the hearts of individuals. Each country spread propaganda to encourage soldiers to kill the enemy. They had to be convinced that the enemy soldiers were lesser men, to kill more efficiently and without hesitation. The Red Cross was an organization created to be the exception, to be neutral and treat all soldiers from any side equally. Members in the Red Cross were instructed to help save any and all, within reason, injured. They did so in World War I without exception based on nationality. When a field unit of the Red Cross came upon an injured man, they would take or carry him to a field hospital or dressing station, or treat him on the spot. They had no preference or prejudice to the enemy. The International Red Cross Movement, or Committee, proclaimed in 1965 that all Red Cross actions should be based on 7 fundamental principles. These fundamental principles are humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, voluntary service, unity, and universality. Although these principles weren't proclaimed until 1965, the same core ideologies were used as the foundation of the organization. Of course, one cannot say how individuals in the Red Cross felt concerning nationalism and prejudice, but volunteers came from all over the world and were divided among fighting nations equally and objectively, regardless of nationality. That is to say, in any given group of Red Cross field units, there was a variety of nationalities, including, but not limited to, Swedish, American, British, and German nationalities. Since nationality, which was heavily distinct in World War I, was ignored in the recruitment and placement of volunteers, one could say that conflict and prejudice based on nationality within the Red Cross was virtually null.
Now listen to me, I heard you fellas brag about your beauties over here, and the girls you love so dear. They may be swell, that's all very well, with all their fancy clothes, but I, the queen of their Colleen and sweet heavenly rose. Oh, that is a song, that is a thing from my...
World War I was unlike any conflict before or since. It was the first fully mechanized war, and the advent of heavy artillery, shells, and machine guns that meant more devastating injuries than ever before could be inflicted. At the same time, the fighting was mostly in trenches, which provided protection for men's bodies. The biggest and worst injury reducer in World War I was shrapnel, which were metal fragments from shellings. This was followed by bullets, grenades, and then bayonets, and other hand-to-hand injuries in that order. Yet, in the early battles of the Western Front, battle casualties were due primarily to artillery fire, followed by that from firearms and smaller arms such as hand grenades and bayonets. Nine months into the war, there began what was to become an avalanche of toxic gas poisoning cases, firstly with chlorine and much later mustard gas. A total of 185,000 cases were recorded, with 7,000 fatalities. Almost all cases were on the Western Front. Overall, gas cases represented about 10% of British casualties, although, of course, the fatality rate was much lower than 0.4%. Whilst many toxic gas cases were returned to duty, most of the really seriously affected were permanently debilitated, and many suffered an early death some years after the war had ended. The shells of World War I tended to burst in huge discrete chunks, which did appalling damage to the human body when they struck one, such as tearing off the limbs. There were several types of shells and shrapnel shells that caused the most wounds. For example, several shrapnel shells were designed to burst in the air and deliver many round balls in all directions with the purpose of wounding men. They were not effective at blowing holes in dugouts, but men inside the trenches were effectively protected from them. Another example of shells were high explosive shells. These were very effective at destroying dugouts and other earthworks, and these created massive concussion waves that could kill a man up to 30 meters away. Often, the men killed by concussion had no visible sign of injury, and troops were often shocked to find groups of men killed seemingly without cause. After shrapnel wounds, the biggest killer was undoubtedly the machine gun, which was called at the time the most murderous weapon ever invented. Exact number of men killed by machine guns are not known, because the machine gun fires what is basically a rifle bullet, except it fires large numbers of them rapidly. Moreover, grenades caused a significant number of wounds, as they were frequently thrown into dugouts where they could explode amongst a crowd of men in the confined space. Finally, wounds were also caused by bayonet and other hand-to-hand combat, which includes knives, brass buckles, maces, clubs, rifle butts, fists, boots, and shovels. In conclusion, these were the main weapons and firearms that caused injuries of thousands of people in the First World War.
The Red Cross in most medical services were comprised of volunteers. Over 3,000 auxiliary hospitals were organized, equipped, and staffed by the Red Cross. Work parties were set up across Britain to support the hospitals. Things such as kneading or sewing were done by the women. The military hospitals tended to be a lot worse for the patients compared to the auxiliary hospitals set up by the Red Cross. Food for wooden soldiers were chosen for the ease of digestion, not its taste. Men were put in different diets for different types of injuries. The Red Cross, operating under the name Joint War Committee, with the Order of St. John, were the first organization to provide motorized ambulances. The first convoy of these ambulances arrived in France in September 1914. The American Red Cross expanded at an insane rate, with memberships increasing 1,000-fold. Doctors at the same time had limited supplies, and the medicine wasn't advanced enough to treat infections. What doctors most used to treat wounds was alcohol, iodine, and bandages. It was in the times of the First World War that preventative measures against infections were applied. Besides these, doctors had equipment to treat soldiers with broken legs, and they also had manual machines which could momentarily support the life of a patient. To amputate infected limbs, doctors used saws and applied morphine as anesthesia. Doctors also used morphine to ease the pain of dying soldiers. And an interesting thing is that doctors at the time had poisonous substances such as lead or sulfur, which they thought had healing properties. By the end of the war, the Red Cross and military medical suppliers had no more resources to spend. There wasn't only a shortage of supplies, but the trained practitioners who would use the supplies were also at a shortage.